Welcome to Small Umbrella in the Rain. Fritz fans, Joe fans, Amy fans, Laurie fans, Meg fans, John fans, all of you. Emily and I had another long literal discussion about Little Woman, especially about Friedrich's role as Joe's literal guide in the novel, helping Joe to find her own voice. Today's comment shoutout goes to Star2B5394, who left this comment to one of my YouTube shorts, which was about transnationalism in Little Woman. I especially like what you said about Professor Bear representing Louisa May Alcott's more mature self. I hadn't considered that, but it makes a lot of sense. And it's very true about the Marches helping anyone in need. When my boyfriend read Little Woman, he said he loved how supportive the family was to everyone around them. Friedrich was based on many men who Louisa loved and who inspired her as a writer. And what I meant by saying that, Louisa was in her 30s when she wrote Little Woman, and in Little Woman, Louisa is writing about her experiences writing trashy stories to a magazine. She finds the editor's requirements quite alarming, and the working environment as well. So Friedrich represents older Louisa and her literal inspirations, giving advice to her younger self that your time would be better spent on writing something that you enjoy and working for people that you actually like. Their family was very open-minded, and they opened their doors to those who were discriminated and overlooked by the society. I think I have mentioned this before, but the historian Laura Walls wrote a really good essay called Louisa May Alcott and the Cosmopolitan Family, which is all about the transnational ideas that the Alcotts have about the universal family. I will put the link to the description if you guys want to read it. This episode is sponsored by Audible. I am currently reading Wilhelm Meister, which was Louisa's favorite novel, and it was written by Goethe. I am reading it in Finnish, but if I would be reading it in German, I am pretty sure that the dialogue would be pretty similar to the way Fritz speaks in Little Woman, because Louisa adored Goethe. Goethe was a rock star for Louisa. You can get a 30-day free trial to Audible by clicking the affiliate link in the description, and at the same time you will be supporting me making this podcast. Funds will go to the hosting services. This is a labor of love. Without further ado, this is Small Umbrella in the Rain, Little Woman podcast, being an authentic writer.
So the symposium that he takes Joe to and somehow has never been adapted to screen.
I've been talking to lots of Fritz fans. The symposium scene is their favorite scene in the novel, and it's never adapted. And I thought it's pretty interesting because it plays a big part of Joe's growth.
They tried to represent this scene a little bit in 1994 a bit, when I think, remember when they have that whole debate around female suffrage, and I think they tried to represent that a little bit, but somehow in a more, intimate setting in the boarding house. I guess I appreciated that bit, but I guess the whole symposium scene, it would always be just really nice to see that represented, because I think it shows Joe changing, and it shows off how, to me, Professor Bear is just a real intellectual and just the sort of person Joe can respect, but it's also her sort of expanding her mind, because she's really never been away from home before. I guess if I understand correctly, she's a little bit limited by where she lives and the people she interacts with, and I guess the symposium is a way of doing that. Louisa May Alcott, she talked about how Joe is sort of exposing herself to very dark themes when she's writing tragedy fiction. And I think it's a way for her to expand her horizons, but without doing it for sensationalist reasons.
Yeah, I agree. I think she mentions in the 1994 film that, Concord has a very limited intellectual circle. Maybe the scene in the 1994 film when they meet and they have that intellectual discussion. And I've heard some people saying that it's difficult to adapt because they're speaking about religion, very Christian themes, but I think you don't need to include that. You can have them speak about human rights, abolitionism, or anything that Louisa held dear to her.
I'm flipping back into my copy, my Kindle copy at the moment, to kind of look at the scene.
I think they are tied together because she has that realization of her stories.
We've been thinking a lot about how a lot of people's grievances with the professor is that it is kind of an elitist. But I also feel like Louisa, in a way, was sort of an elitist as well. And I feel like people are sort of, why does he look down on her for writing genre fiction to feed her family? And I'm like, well, she doesn't feel good about it either. So, which I think we have discussed before, but I think she in a way wants to be producing very highbrow things as well. Even if it focuses very much on very domestic experiences, she still wants to provide a sort of intellectually stimulating experience. I feel like people massively overlook that. I noticed in the chapter they refer very subtly to these things. She always puts in these little details, like two matrons have been discussing women's rights and that sort of thing. She really likes doing things like that. What are your thoughts on the chapter?
I actually read this quote from Stephen King, where he talked about Louisa's sensational stories, how he came to the conclusion that she was not very happy with them, and she was much more interested in writing realism like Little Woman. Even though it's a children's book, it's written with a realistic style. I think in that chapter, Louisa herself is condemning the sensationalism. She's not supporting the fact that she is writing them.
Obviously, I think our ideas about sensationalism, sensationalism has definitely changed a lot since that time. I think I made a reference to my first Little Women video, which is that she was talking more about things, people who create art that is just meant to entertain and not really add anything to the intellectual life of society. So I think it's not so much that you can't write about dark things and you can't write about really gruesome stuff or spicy stuff. It's more that, well, if you're writing it just to just like a Transformers film, it's just like, do you want to have more Transformers films or more super dark superhero films, that don't really add thematically to our intellectual life. So I think it's more if it's superficially dark or superficially very grim, then it's not really adding much to us as a society. It's not really adding much to the fabric of art. And I can only think of how, after seeing Alan Moore and Watchmen, a lot of people started to create just dark comics because it was popular to make really dark comics. But then it wasn't really pushing the boundaries of what Alan Moore was trying to do. And I think that's a little bit of an analogy that I draw to Little Women. The professor is saying, it's it's not so much I don't want these stories to exist, but what are they really adding to how we think about things, how we think about life, and how we see the world. So that's my take on it.
Sensationalism in the 19th century, that was very different than what it is now. Yeah. The themes that we have now, they would have been horrifying to them. Yeah. Game of Thrones stuff, that would have been completely banned. There's the scene in Rose in Bloom where Rose's uncle tells Rose that there's this book that she should not read and she wants to read it. And I hear some Little Woman fans saying that, what was this book that he was talking about? And then they make these old suggestions that maybe it was Madame Bovary or something. And then I was thinking, no, maybe it's something that Louisa actually came across when she was writing the sensational stories, and she didn't like that.
So I don't think she was above, exploring sort of very intimate themes or more, even being a bit more sexual. I think it was just more, well, what are you saying with your art? Are you actually saying something? Are you presenting a very authentic aspect of yourself? And I guess she feels that's missing from her more sensationalist stories, which is that, well, this is not who I am. This is I'm not saying anything about myself. It's not earnest. This is not an earnest piece of art.
That's a struggle when you're working in the creative industry, when you're being asked to do this thing that appeals to the masses, and then you just want to do the authentic art for yourself. Maybe it contributes something to the society.
I think that trying to strike a balance between what is profitable and what is actually good, I think, it is tough for creatives to deal with, and, I think we're seeing a lot of that even now. What is making money is, a Disney remake, when everyone is like, well, why don't people just write more original stories? Why don't people make something new? But I think it shows us that a lot of the money-making side of art has not changed because sometimes you resort to like the same formulas in order to make art profitable. And I like seeing that kind of universality in the work. And I think I might have pointed out, I don't know if it was to you, but I think the professor kind of parallels Joe's father in a way. There's a little section where he says, well, I feel like maybe you should do something a bit more authentic and not really listen to too many critics, and don't like cut apart your work, or whatever it is, analogy that she uses. And I like how that statement from her father pays off later when the professor actually is critiquing these stories. I like how those two different statements are connected.
Yeah, and I think there's even a quote in Little Woman where the narrator says that the critique is the writer's best friend. So she's definitely listening what the people are saying about her work.
I do wish that aspect of what Louisa is saying in that particular section, I feel like people should just scrutinize it a lot better. I feel like people don't really read into that, because I think a lot of times with Little Women, people take out of it what they're taking into the work. They kind of take out their own notions about, Joe and creativity, because everyone wants to see themselves in Joe. And I guess I feel like whatever they see, a lot of times when people want to insert themselves into Joe's character, they kind of take out, their own message. But I think when you read into it, no one is really telling Joe what to do or not to do. Nobody has given her that sort of, imperative at any time. I wonder what you think.
I think one of the problems I had when I was doing this research for my essays was that there are a lot of Louisa May Alcott schoolers who actually read into Louisa being the Joe in films and not Joe in the book. They take the narration that, Friedrich was criticizing Joe as a writer, when in the novel it's the opposite. I don't know how people have ignored that. Maybe it tells something about the films, the way they show Friedrich and Joe arguing. I mean, that doesn't happen in the novel, and then they never show Joe and Laurie arguing, which happens in the novel.
Yeah, I think I was surprised rereading the book again. I realized, I was like, wow, there's not really a confrontation at all.
No.
I guess, adding conflict, it helps the visual media. I think it makes that part of Joe's evolution a bit more explicit. I didn't have as much of an issue with, say, 1994, because I think her being resistant to the message, which she wouldn't do in the book. I think the professor coming back and articulating to her, this is why I think, your work could be better. I think you're better than this. Which is essentially what he gets across in the book, but in a much less explicit way.
Yeah.
I hated the interaction that they had in the Greta Gerwig adaptation. This is not new to you. I've talked to you about it, but it's just the fact that she's like, no, nobody's going to remember you, but everyone's going to remember my name. I'm a good writer. I'm already good. I don't need to improve. I hate it. I hate it so much.
It is so silly because, I was doing the research, then I came across this passage that Louisa had written to her journals. Emerson had given her this advice and she was following it, and now she's a much better writer because of that. But then I was talking to someone who was, later I found out that they were on Joe and Laurie camp, but they were like, I hated Friedrich's character in Gerwig's film. She's right. I hate all the German people because Greta Gerwig hates German people. Okay, this is getting a bit weird now.
Wow.
I should know better not to talk with, Joe and Laurie fans. That was interesting.
Someone actually commented on my video as a Laurie fan and was like, I always thought Joe should have ended up with Laurie, and I don't know why, after years and years of adaptations and analysis, people still think Laurie is better for Joe. All the toxicity, we've discussed this before, but he's so toxic, and the fact that Greta Gerwig thinks that he brings her into the adult world, I think it's just silly. It's so silly. He's a man-child when he first says, Joe, be with me, and Joe's like, you just want me to take care of you, and to me, that's not asking someone to enter adulthood with you. That's just being I'm a man-child to be with me, and in a sense, he also wants her to stay a child with him and maintain that dynamic that they've always had. I don't know what she was thinking when she said that.
One of my friends, she's a big Amy fan, and she said that Greta Gerwig had said that Laurie is Joe's first feminist ally, and then she was like, for the third part of the book, it's the opposite. He's the most anti-feminist character in the story, but then he grows in that relationship with Amy.
Yeah.
I have no idea what is the book that Greta Gerwig had read. I didn't get the copy of that.
Yeah, no, because you sent me that article, or the interview, and I couldn't even get through it.
No.
I was like, I think Greta Gerwig didn't read this book.
Yeah, I feel the same. And then that part of Friedrich preventing Jo to write Little Woman. Jo doesn't write Little Woman. She writes when she's in her mid-30s. In Jo's Boys, 2 sentences that Jo wrote this book. She became famous, that's it.
We've established in the last talk that I feel like a lot of people don't read the sequels, and I guess people don't acknowledge the sequels. I think there was someone on YouTube that I watched who, loved Greta Gerwig, that film, and then read the book. I was like, I was so frustrated that, Jo didn't, publish her book, and she gave up at the end. I'm like, but she didn't.
Yeah, Louisa didn't write Little Woman when she was in her 20s. She was in her mid-30s. And Little Woman, the whole saga, it's a Bildungsroman, semi-biography.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's more accurate to life that she, didn't publish until her 30s. And I think it also makes sense because then you just are a more mature writer at that age, for most people. We cannot get around talking around Greta Gerwig every time we talk. But I think we also talked a little bit about how Jo and the professor established sort of this common language between them when they talk with each other, because the use of thou and you, and so I guess for me, I think it's what we've discussed is that he doesn't want to hold her at a distance, and so it's almost like a pet name. It's for them having a common language with each other, but also just establishing that they are the ones who are the closest to each other, which is great. I don't think it's as extreme in the actual mentioning of German, because it's for your friends you say du, and then for say professional relations, your boss or someone you don't really know, you use the. And so then when you establish sort of a rapport with them, then you would say du. It's not quite as extreme as how Fritz takes it. Little Women, Louisa was not a native German speaker, so she was kind of doing her own thing with language, which I don't have a problem with.
In Germany and in Russian, I think they use a lot of the formal language, which is not that common in English or here in Finland. But then in the 19th century, I would imagine that it was even more important for the Germans to use see and do. So there was a bigger difference.
Yeah, probably.
So when Louisa would have been in Germany, she would have been using see a lot when she was talking to people. But I think, in that relationship with Jo and Friedrich too, it becomes more of a pet name. Then it's interesting because when you read poems from Henry Thoreau or Goethe, they are always using the two. Makes you wonder if that was something that happened between Louisa and Henry. But that's all speculation.
Yeah. We can't really know for sure, but it's an interesting quirk. And I think we also forget sort of the more antiquated nature of language at that time. I think we try so hard to modernize Little Women and bring it into our own time that I think we forget that it's very much a product of its time and is very much colored by the history, which I think people forget factors a lot into the events in the book and actually colors it.
Yeah, it annoyed me a lot when Greta Gerwig was complaining how he's using the word too. I'm reading Little Woman when I'm 17, and I think that's actually really romantic. But then again, I was studying German back then. I have this odd Finnish translation of Little Woman, and the part where he calls Jo professorine, it's translated to professor's little wife. And then, in German it means female professor. Female professor. He's giving her this title that she's his equal. I can imagine a Finnish person reading Little Woman, that poor translation from the 50s. Oh, Friedrich is such a sexist, and then in the original he's a feminist. Oh, no. I'm pretty sure that the person who translated that didn't speak a word of German.
No, that's a severe misunderstanding of that word. Yeah. The thing is, it's so cute when he calls her professor. It's because, even though he's older than her, he just sees her also as a professor and on his level. Even though, on paper, they don't start out that way. I really can't understand how people can't get behind this relationship.
Yeah, part of me hopes that they will make a Little Woman adaptation where they clearly show that Friedrich is German, but maybe also include parts of him living in Germany. Yeah. That would be nice. Yeah. Because, it was important to Louis that he was German, or that Laurie was Italian.
Yeah, because I think there is a romanticization of Europeans quite a bit, because I think they go quite in depth into Laurie's appearance and sort of his nature because of his sort of European background, and Louise is definitely invested in sort of exploring these things. But, I mean, she definitely favors sort of the German side of things. I feel like a lot of people don't even really address Laurie's Italian side a whole lot.
There are lots of times in the novel where Laurie's temper is connected to his Italian side. In the movies, Laurie doesn't really have a temper, so you don't really see that connection. And there are just as many comparisons of Laurie being Italian as there are Friedrich being German. Because he was German, he loved this and this. Because Laurie was Italian, he did things like that. It's because Laurie has brown skin in the book. When he moves to Concord, only people he makes friends with are these sisters in the neighborhood. He's kind of being discriminated because of the brown skin. There's some truth in that because, Italian immigrants and then German immigrants, they weren't very accepted back in the days.
That's true.
Then Louisa's publisher, I think he asked Louisa to rewrite Laurie's character for the 1880 edition, so he became more American, and they erased the part of him having brown skin and sort of made him more handsome.
Yeah.
Quote-unquote handsome.
I feel like adaptations, the brown skin thing, they don't lean into that a whole lot.
No.
It's really interesting to see how many details people omit when they adapt Laurie. I mean, we discussed last time how they don't acknowledge how Laurie has an arc. Laurie's musical nature kind of acknowledged, sometimes not really, and then Laurie's toxicity as a person, as someone approaching Joe, not acknowledged anymore. So I think it's really weird how in popular imagination he's sort of this guy who's a potential love interest, and that's really it. And because the thing is, to buy into him going for Amy at the end, you have to give him a sort of character change. And I think at least in 1994, he says, I'm off to do business, I'm going to go work with my grandfather, and, he tells Amy, can you wait for me? But that's not really fully fleshed out, and of course it's completely omitted in Greta Gerwig's film. In Greta Gerwig's film, you just kind of feel like, he found out that Beth died, so he went to be with Amy, and we needed Beth dying in order for that whole love story to happen, which makes no sense.
Talking this with a friend of mine, maybe Louisa actually wanted to write a young adult novel because of just sexual awakening.
A lot of people take Little Women as a young adult novel.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. There's that weird thing in the UK where they've cut the novel into two parts. It is very distinctively two parts.
Yeah, it's same here in Finland. It's in two parts. Yeah. Or it was.
But I also feel like the sexual stuff, from what I know, is just more present in Rose and Bloom rather than in Little Women. In Little Women, it's a lot. I feel like it's a lot more subtextual. Do you think that's accurate?
Somewhat, but I think all of Louisa's novels have some kind of sexual tension between Joe archetype and the Friedrich archetype.
I can see that with Joe and the Professor. How would you say that applies with sort of the more Laurie character, or that sort of more Faustian character?
I think there is a scene where Amy sort of acknowledges that Laurie looks like very Italian, very artistically inclined. So she begins to pay attention to him more than she did before, like his looks, the way he looks. So there is that aspect, but then with Laurie, one of my friends said that the fact that Laurie is horny, that doesn't excuse him harassing Joe.
No. I mean, you can definitely see him being definitely horny for Joe, but it's for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Right? It's because, he wants to basically take this friendship and basically make it into his own image, and also basically be able to kind of play out his own sort of sexual awakening and sexual frustration in that relationship. But of course, it doesn't really excuse how he talks to her and how he blackmails her, and is just generally a real man-child and is just kind of jerk. There's that interesting bit we might have talked about last time where he tries to write sort of a piece of music about Joe, but then can't really envision him.
Yeah.
which kind of emphasizes how much he's really projecting on her more than actually appreciating her. And which I feel like it's like such a teenager thing to do as well.
Yeah, he's imagining this dream ghost, and then it doesn't really fit into Joe's character. And then this ghost, it starts to look like Amy, so I don't think he could have done that if he had true feelings for Joe.
Yeah, no, definitely.
One of my friends, she thought that maybe the reason Louisa added the Laurie proposing Joe was because she wanted people to see how they were a bad match. I got to think about Goethe's Werther that we talked last time. You know, Louisa was very educated on Goethe and, you know, Goethean themes and all of that. I was wondering, like, if Louisa wanted to make this statement with the proposal, how, you know, Laurie's like, I'm going to kill myself if you don't marry me. She kind of didn't really expect that, you know, people interpretate that sequence same way as they did with Goethe's Werther, completely wrong. Or maybe Louisa knew that that would make her the most money, and that's why she wrote it. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, wait, so you're saying like she wanted that sort of declaration to actually like spice up the scene a bit?
Oh, maybe like she wanted to make this statement that you should not marry this kind of guy blackmailing you. Yeah. Or maybe she didn't really care about it. Just made it because it made, you know, lots of money for Goethe, and maybe it could make lots of money for her. But I don't think Louisa was that superficial.
Yeah, no, I don't think she was. And I think if we remember from, like, a lot of characters from Goethe who actually had that sort of sentiment, like, they did not end up very well.
No.
I mean, Werther dies. I mean, these people, I mean, they became very glorified during Sturmumfang, but still, you know, for the kind of book that Louisa was writing, I don't think that would be a marker of the character you should be rooting for.
Yeah.
I mean, Laurie's kind of a parody of that in a way. And even in Goethe, I don't think Goethe was even endorsing that behavior.
Yeah, he was criticizing being overly emotional. And I think we talked about this last time, how Laurie's proposal is completely opposite to Friedrich's proposal. But it, you know, explains why people still today misunderstand what's going on there. In the proposal.
I love how we've talked before about how in cultural conversation we know how to acknowledge, Edward Cullen is toxic. Jacob Black is toxic. These characters in young adult fiction are toxic. But somehow in like the classic, you know, work that has defined so much of coming of age fiction, we cannot recognize a toxic character. And that's not part of mainstream conversation, and even Greta Gerwig, who purports to be making a feminist work, can't even see that. It's funny how popular imagining of people just kind of warp an original work, which you've also seen with The Professor as well, regrettably.
If you wish to follow Emily, she has a booktube channel called Emiloid, and she also makes excellent video essays. If you wish to follow Small Umbrella in the Rain, I am on YouTube, Tumblr, and Instagram under the name Little Woman Channel. And if you wish to find the transcript for this episode, go to fairychamber/The Little Woman Project. Thank you for listening. Take care and make good choices. Bye.